and so it's gonna be good. You know what? Listen, you don't have to stay for the whole thing, but I'm gonna play like the first few minutes how I divulged into it, so that at least you can like get a feeling for what the class will be like, and then whether people stay or not, or like whether people then at least you can get a feel for it.
Without further ado,
Okay.
pain is identity. So as you can see here, what we have is what I call the pyramid, which is not really much of a name, but it is a pyramid. It's a triangle to show you that the level of which we see things. So that the surface level things, like the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, are the roles and archetype understandings of what role you play in the world. And what we see is there's a lot of misunderstanding around people as a whole. I'm trying to connect with them because we don't understand that they are often fulfilling an archetypal role rather, that was a part of their life since they were children, and it's often just a factor, a myriad of factors from, what order you were born in, what is your internal genetic code, a lot of the things that impact you. How were your parents? What was your life like? And as you can see that we've moved down the ladder from this is sociological implications and as to who you are amongst others in your life, your job, how you see yourself. What I just mentioned about your experiences, your environment, like what is the psychology that is about how are you impacted by your experience and the life you have as a kid until now. The neuroscientific aspects, we have a neurological dependency where sometimes people have different makeups. That's pretty obvious to all of us, but we're going to get into how that impacts the subject alone of how pain sort of can emphasize and reiterate a certain identity and how we see ourselves. And lastly, the thing that is the most new and novice and sort of nuanced is the systems and substrate level, which is what the cognitive physics level operates on. If this was a city, this would be sort of the gravel and the soil that a lot of this is constituted on, and it helps to understand that because you'll be able to see where that layer applies. And oftentimes you have to go down one to really understand it. The phenomenon. So the first thing we should know is some pain does not resolve, at least not on its own, and it really shapes who we are. In fact, when a pain persists long enough, it stops being just an experience you're going through. It starts being a condition in which your mind organizes and shapes itself around. And this class really is just going to examine what happens when that pain doesn't leave you, and that when that relief from the consistent pain you're experiencing never fully arrives. And so how the system adapts around it and what that constitutes itself within this aspect of how role and archetype plays its part. We're going to talk about what it is and what it isn't here. So this is not about temporary stress, right? This the things that we go through. Maybe you're having a bad day. Maybe you've got a lot on your plate. This is about. And it's not even necessarily about acute trauma responses either. That's its own phenomenon or emotional discomfort per se.
I appreciate it.
We all go through things like this. We all have variation of what you might call trauma, which is where your brain is not prepared to handle a certain amount of pain, and so it causes an acute reaction,
absolutely,
which is a somatic response.
Trauma is the sort of response to
your body's internal sort of equilibrium. What this is about is persistent internal pain, right? Whether it's emotional, mental. This is the kind of pain that reshapes you. It creates a role of in your life, and it's not always about your experiences directly as it is how your mind interprets these experiences, and right, and then it gradually reorganizes yourself, right? So since this is more of an archetypal analysis, we always try to focus on an example, an archetype that fulfills the role of who we're, a highlighted figure that can really help us understand who this kind of effect and how it can shape you. And this whole presentation will not be about this person, but this will give us an idea as we dive in deeper. And so we're anchoring in this to this single example, not necessarily to analyze this character, but to make this understanding and connection of how this structure is and how it's visible over time. And it'll allow us to see a few things, which is, for one, the persistence of the behavior, the rigidity of the identity, and the long-term stabilization effect without missing any particular data or nuance. And that character is Batman. I feel like this was fitting. This is a very known character. I feel like, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the number one comic book character known. Spider-Man might be either number one or Batman might be number one. I am pretty sure it's Batman, and I realize I'm seeing myself here. We're gonna transition that way. There we go. So Batman is, aka Bruce Wayne, is a really good example of this because he had an early catastrophic situation. As if those who don't know, if there's a few of you who don't know, he lost his parents when he was around 10 or 9 years old, or pretty young, developmental years. In a tragic accident, coming out of a theater, his parents were there. A mugger in an alley shot them, and he witnessed the whole thing, and it really shaped his identity moving forward, right? So this is what we call a pain that does not meaningfully diminish over time. It's not like an acute response to a small trauma. This is a major rewiring of the brain that takes place here, and repeated exposure to threat without disengagement, as his mind reloops this to the point where it becomes his intention throughout his life, his trajectory is to always recreate this feeling of numbing the fear, but chasing this high stress situation, and it becomes a consistent behavior across radically different contexts. So it's the same behavior, but it shows up in different situations. If you can hear that background, forgive me. So we're treating this as what we call a fixed configuration, not just like a narrative arc of the character. You see, we're examining it from that example. So what we observe here, across time and context, we observe a constant vigilance. He never allows anything to take place. He's militant about his approach to things, as you see him, monitor Gotham City with all his technology and his gadgets, and how he sort of reduces his own life to being this character, this archetype he's fulfilling as the ultimate control. We have the assumption of responsibility for systemic failure. So you can see here, he takes the responsibility for systemic failure of the city personally. He puts it all on his shoulders, which is not realistic, but it gives him a path to strive towards as a way for his body somatically to make sense of something that he can't explain, which was his trauma. You'll also notice that he has an intolerance for predictability, which is managed in both of these here, where he literally cannot sustain a lifestyle or a mentality that doesn't allow for complete control. Okay, he has a refusal to disengage, so it means he cannot stop doing this. To the point where his body can't take it anymore, as no one's could, and there's a refusal to disengage, even when alternatives exist, like the police or he's a billionaire. For those who don't know, he's a billionaire who runs a company. He could supply his infrastructure and his knowledge and this drive to a more traditional means of tackling a problem like this, but he's finding solace in the chaotic form. And of course, there's an escalating cost. Identity consistency, despite the cost he pays. For those who really are deep in the comics, he loses people to death. He loses relationships. He loses his self, his sanity. He beats up his body consistently. He loses basically his life to this commitment that is based on fear and not so much as a being able to heal beyond this. You see. And then that role sort of emerges in this archetype as a constitute of these pieces. From these observations, basically it becomes clear that it's not chosen for the expression of what he believes as some moral, system or some sort of virtue or a reward he's getting from this. There's really none of that involved. In fact, the thing that makes it is just he wants stability internally. It's just he's stabilizer of chaos. He absorbs the threats. And there's a point of continuity where everything else basically becomes unstable. So that's what the archetype this takes on for him. And here's how this can show up in real life as well. So it's a pattern, right? It's not a symbol. Archetypes are pattern behavior, not sort of symbolic in the idea of how they express, right? So then it's not mythology or some sort of moral identity, right? It's how are you surfacing at the tip of the iceberg in your life, and who are you amongst others? And this is a repeated functional pattern for those who for one, doesn't step away. It doesn't absorb. It's someone who absorbs instability, but it doesn't create stability for the person internally. Okay, and they remain disengaged throughout the entirety of their submission to this archetype that they're playing. They're completely submerged into this, right? And it emerges because it works for that person internally, so they think, you know. Cost is not a disqualifier. This is the biggest part that you kind of begin to see. How I chose this picture because it shows a really beat up version of Batman that is has succumbed to many lost battles. For those who are once again fans, and by the way, I'm a big fan of this character for his resilience, but not for the unhealthy aspects that cost him his life, or nearly cost him his life multiple times. You see, it doesn't. The role persists despite anything that you encounter, and you might think, well, that's good resilience. That's what you want, but in reality, this is something that really costs you your sanity, and often more than than it is worth paying. You see, the exhaustion he experiences doesn't stop it. His suffering doesn't end it. The insight that he gains does not change it, and this is a really big one. If the new knowledge you gain that could help fight in a better way, that could help change the situation more effectively, does not stop your behavior and alter it for adaptability, and if you are unadaptable, you are likely falling into an archetypal role that comes from pain itself and not any sort of rationality, right? The role is doing more than expressing the identity. It's trying to hold together your belief system. So we expand from here. At this point, we've considered the surface value based on this example, right? So we described that the role is no longer enough, and you still don't know why it feels necessary, or why the alternatives feel unsafe, or why stepping away feels like a failure or a collapse, right? So to answer that, we have to look at what happens inside the person itself. What's really going on under the hood? And that's where we get into the first layer, which is psychology, which is many people are aware of, right? Psychology. If you're here, this is the second video as we peel into the next phase, which is understanding psychological underpinnings behind psychology as a whole, but more importantly, under the understanding of how pain affects identity. We thank you for being here. So, psychology, how does it affect a person beyond just the role, but what is going on underneath the hood? So, why do we need psychology, first of all? Well, at the role level, archetypes, right? We can describe what someone does, okay? We can see their behavior. But psychology is going to explain why that sort of disengagement is psychologically unsafe in regards to the pain equation. And this section really is going to examine how pain reshapes meaning and how responsibility becomes fused with self-worth. And then more so how identity stabilizes around unresolved internal threat. So these are the kind of things you get to see, looking through each other and observing, but really what's beyond a keyhole eye view, what is going on underneath. So, pain as a persistent psychological variable. In psychology, pain becomes destabilizing, not because of the pain itself, because various people go through various pains and have different reactions. It's really because it's not resolving. It's consistent. It's often in the mind, neurologically speaking, things like Parkinson's are often what we call inflammation. Inflammation is a consistent behavior of reacting to stimuli that is not actually there, and it's internal, which causes erosion. And so when pain persists, there's a loop that needs to be closed, which is, believe it or not, the main cause of just about every real problem out there is either premature or a late loop. It needs to close, and sometimes it never closes, and that really is the big problem. Cancer is a response of consistent expansion of a growing cell that doesn't propagate properly because it doesn't close its loop. So the threat never really downgrades, and the resolution is continuously postponed. This shows up in behaviors, but it also shows up psychologically. And so the system has to adapt by reorganizing around the pain instead of waiting for the removal of it, because it never leaves. So, Making meaning under persistent pain. As we know, humans cannot tolerate meaningless suffering indefinitely. They begin to catastrophize. So when pain persists without explanation or resolution, the psyche is going to attempt to assign a cause to it, or assign some sort of responsibility, or assign a purpose to this pain. And that often is what shapes your identity. That's what becomes a lesson. So if there's no external explanation that really satisfies that system, then the meaning is going to be generated internally, where the pain begins to transition from experience to an identity. Now, responsibility as a psychological stabilizer. This is one of the first ones. One of the most common meanings assigned to unresolved pain is responsibility. So psychologically speaking, responsibility will restore predictability, create a causal structure, and it reduces that feeling of helplessness that bothers so much of us. But you say to yourself, if I'm responsible, something could be done, right? And if you look back into your past about things that you felt you weren't responsible for, and you're playing this loop, that's not helpful. If something could have been done, then the world would still be coherent. Or if the belief stabilizes the psyche, then it seems like it's a safe bet, even if it's still painful. And that's the illusion, so to speak. Whoops. So control is going to substitute safety. You see here, there's just too much control. When safety cannot be restored, control becomes the substitute, right? So this manifests psychologically as a hyper-responsibility for behavior or outcomes, whether it's responsible for others or self, an intolerance for ambiguity, and persistent vigilance. So control is not sought for dominance, even though you may see someone who seems aggressive and assertive when it comes to retaining information or taking responsibility for a situation, or persistent vigilance and sort of distrustful behavior. But often this is a response to that pain and sort of how their brain has developed its personality around these behaviors and around this experience. And the control is really just a preventive reoccurrence of this original pain that continues to propagate in their life.
Okay. I think that was enough of a teaser. It's about 20 minutes. This whole thing's like an hour 20. So the full episode drops on Friday, along with a YouTube video that's sort of a compressed understanding of what all this is, also on Friday. If you've been watching, I really appreciate it. So I really dig deeper into these things according to the lenses of not just psychology, but the neuroscience aspect, and of course the biggest one, which is the cognitive physics aspect. And we're really pleased to be sort of divulging and breaking down what's going on underneath the hood of all of us. And over time, as lessons progress, it will get more and more interesting across all kinds of different subjects and archetypes. But I'm really pleased to be doing this, and I thank you guys for being here. I'm actually going to end stream pretty soon. But we did what we wanted to do, which was just get information out there regarding this topic. And so I'll be streaming every Tuesday. I'll also be producing, like I said, articles on my Substack, JaxLabs, JaxLabs, same name as here, on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. A podcast on Thursdays, and then a video on Fridays. On the curriculum, of course, in theschool.com for the Genius Lab. You can join that based on the links in my description attached to my TikTok. I'm going to put them in my description attached to my TikTok as well. My Twitch. And you can also, if you just search up JaxLabs, you'll probably find all of it. Anyway, thank you to whoever's here, and we'll see you soon, and take care.